Have you ever stood at the edge of something new, a fresh start so beautiful, it almost feels unreal? My name is Evelyn Parker, and maybe you'll see a part of your own story in mine. I used to believe that life's biggest turning points came with a grand announcement, a ribbon-cutting moment, or a flash of lightning. But the truth is, most new beginnings slip in quietly, like sunlight on a kitchen floor. For me, it started in the gentle rain of Portland, Oregon. I was 34, a tax consultant who could balance numbers, but not always her own hopes. I had just married Michael Grant, a man whose laughter warmed up the grayest Northwest day. I'd spent years dreaming of a home filled with laughter, quiet understanding, and Sunday mornings that smelled like pancakes and fresh coffee. Now standing in our tiny Selwood apartment, I thought maybe I'd finally found it. At first, everything felt like a fairy tale written just for me. Michael and I spent lazy evenings assembling mismatched furniture, swapping stories about our childhoods, and making plans for a future we both believed was finally within reach. Portland's gentle drizzle became our soundtrack, and our apartment a second-floor walk-up with creaky floors, and a view of the neighbors' roses felt like the coziest place in the world. My friends would joke that I'd become an incurable romantic, but it's easy to believe in happy endings when you're living inside one. Sure, there were quirks Michael's mother, Catherine, would call a little too often, offering advice on everything from cooking to career moves, but I chalked it up to excitement. "She's just eager to see us happy," Michael would say, and I wanted to believe him. After all, wasn't that what family was supposed to feel like? Support, love, and maybe a little meddling from time to time. It's funny how we can miss the warning signs when we're looking for the best in people. In those early days, I believed that kindness could fix anything, that if I gave enough, things would settle into harmony. When Catherine dropped by unannounced with homemade apple pie, I welcomed her in. When she offered to help organize our pantry, I let her. I wanted so much to be the perfect daughter-in-law to fit into Michael's family without causing ripples. I ignored the tightness in my chest when she commented on our decorating choices or the way she'd quietly rearranged the silverware. She means well, I told myself. She just wants to be included. Looking back, I can see how slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boundaries of our new marriage began to blur. But at the time, I simply felt grateful for Michael, for our little apartment, for the chance to build a new life in a city that always felt a little bit like home. If you've ever tried to balance your own happiness with the expectations of others, you know how quickly the scales can tip. My story isn't just about the joy of new beginnings, but also the lessons I learned when those beginnings became complicated. In this video, I'll share the journey that taught me about the strength of a mother's love, the power of setting boundaries, and the courage it takes to start over, even when the path ahead is uncertain. So if you've ever wondered whether you're alone in feeling overwhelmed by family, or if you've questioned your right to carve out a space that's truly yours, I hope you'll find comfort and maybe a bit of inspiration in the story I'm about to tell. Because every home has its shadows. Every new beginning is built on the echoes of what came before. And sometimes it's only when the storms roll in that we discover just how much light we really carry inside. In those early months of marriage, life felt like a gentle river carrying Michael and me, along with easy laughter and shared routines. Catherine, my mother-in-law, would drift into our lives on the weekends at first. She always brought something: fresh bread from a bakery in Hawthorne, a bunch of dahlias from her garden, or stories about Michael's childhood that made him grin with nostalgia. It felt sweet, harmless, even a little comforting. Looking back, I realize I mistook her presence for family warmth, not yet recognizing how those visits began to chip away at the boundaries Michael and I were trying to build. The subtle changes crept in like mist over the Willamette River. Catherine's drop-ins grew more frequent. One Tuesday evening, she let herself in with the spare key Michael had given her just in case. I was still in my workout clothes, hair damp, dinner half prepped. "Don't mind me," she called, already bustling through the kitchen as if she belonged there. She unpacked groceries she'd brought, her favorite coffee, an expensive cheese, and rearranged my spice rack while chatting about her day. I laughed it off, not wanting to seem ungrateful, but inside I felt my stomach tighten. It was such a small thing, I told myself. just family being family. At first, I tried to see the best in everything. When Catherine began planning our weekend meals, I went along with it, grateful for a night off from cooking. When she started bringing over laundry, Michael's shirts need extra care. I smiled and thanked her, even though it made me feel like a guest in my own home. I brushed aside the way she'd comment on the clutter in the entryway or the old towels in the bathroom. I told myself she's trying to help, and sometimes she really was, like the time she fixed our leaky faucet or left a lasagna in the fridge when I came down with a bad cold. Those gestures were genuine, but they always seemed to come with a subtle undertone. This is how things should be done. It's easy to dismiss the little things, especially when you're still finding your footing as a newlywed. I wanted so badly to be liked, to prove I was worthy of Michael and his family. I'd heard from friends about difficult in-laws, about horror stories of meddling mothers and ruined holidays, but I thought that won't happen to us. I believed, perhaps naively, that kindness could smooth out any rough edge. When Catherine started leaving her knitting projects on our couch, or forgetting her reading glasses by the window, I picked them up and set them aside, ignoring the growing sense that my space was slowly shrinking. One afternoon, after a long day at work, I walked in to find Catherine hosting tea in our living room with two of her friends from church. They smiled warmly, complimenting the lovely light in our apartment. I tried to hide my shock, my irritation. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I hadn't even known they were coming. I excused myself hiding in the bathroom and texting Michael. "Did you know your mom is here with friends?" He replied with a laughing emoji. "She means, well, Ev," he said later. "She just gets lonely sometimes." I nodded, feeling the first seeds of resentment sprout. In America, we grow up hearing about the importance of independence. Movies, books, and even social norms tell us that when you get married, you build your own home emotionally and physically. But reality is often more complicated. Families, especially those built on old traditions, sometimes blur the lines between helping and hovering. I started noticing the way Catherine's presence affected our marriage. Michael and I fought more usually about little things that seemed to trace back to his mother, her opinions about our finances, her advice on our schedules, her suggestions about how we should spend holidays. Each disagreement ended the same way, with Michael caught between wanting to keep peace and not wanting to hurt his mom. I remember sitting across from my friend Jamie at a coffee shop on Alberta Street, pouring my heart out between sips of strong espresso. "Am I overreacting?" I asked, feeling foolish for complaining. Jamie shook her head, smiling kindly. "Boundaries are important, Ev. If you don't set them now, it only gets harder." She told me about her own struggle with her mother-in-law, how setting rules early had saved her marriage. Her words stayed with me even as I doubted my own resolve. Still, I hesitated. It felt easier to avoid confrontation, to keep swallowing my discomfort, rather than risk an awkward conversation. I told myself that Catherine would adjust, that she just needed time to let go of her role as Michael's caretaker. But the truth was, the more space I gave, the more she seemed to take. Small things added up: my favorite mug, missing my favorite blanket, moved family heirlooms. Catherine insisted belonged better in her house than ours. Each time I let it slide, wanting to be gracious, but also feeling more invisible. There was a Saturday morning when I woke up early, hoping for a quiet breakfast with Michael. Instead, I found Catherine in our kitchen, already brewing coffee, setting out bagels and fruit. She'd let herself in again while we slept. I forced a smile, hiding my disappointment, as Michael greeted his mother with open arms. "Mom, you're the best," he said, and I wondered not for the first time whether my own needs would ever matter as much as his mother's comfort. Looking back, I can see how easy it is for boundaries to slip one polite yes at a time. I wish I'd understood sooner that love doesn't mean sacrificing your own needs to please everyone else. That lesson was a slow burn, a realization that came only after enough little hurts piled up to become impossible to ignore. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your marriage and for yourself is to say, "This is my home too. My voice matters here." As autumn settled in over Portland, the rain heavier and the evenings longer, I knew a change was coming. My patience was thinning, and Catherine's presence felt less like comfort and more like a storm on the horizon. Michael and I would have to make a choice, keep drifting, or finally set some boundaries before our little home was lost for good. That turning point, though, would arrive in ways I never expected. But that, as you'll see, is a story of its own. At first, I kept hoping things would find their balance, that the small discomforts would fade, as Catherine got used to sharing Michael with someone else. For a while, I tried to convince myself that every couple went through this awkward dance with in-laws, that patience, compromise, and a little extra kindness would smooth over the awkwardness. But the truth is, no matter how much you try to patch up the cracks, if the foundation isn't steady, the house will always feel like it might tumble in the next storm. It started with subtle shifts between Michael and me. I'd wake up to find him already chatting on the phone with his mother, sometimes discussing things we hadn't talked about yet as a couple. He'd come home late from work, and when I suggested a quiet dinner, he'd mention that Catherine was joining us without ever asking how I felt. I tried to speak up softly at first, then, with a little more urgency. "I just want us to have some time together, Michael," I said one night, my voice trembling with hope and frustration. He looked surprised, maybe even a little hurt. "She's just trying to help Ev. Why are you making this into a big deal?" That question haunted me. Was I overreacting? Was it selfish to crave privacy in our own home? I turned these questions over and over in my mind, usually late at night when Michael was asleep, and the world was quiet enough for all my fears to rise up. I started questioning my own needs, shrinking my wishes down to fit the story I thought I was supposed to live, the good wife, the understanding daughter-in-law, the one who could hold everything together with a smile. But the harder I tried, the lonelier I felt. One evening stands out in my memory like a bruise you keep pressing. I'd planned a special dinner for just the two of us, lit candles, made Michael's favorite meal, put on a record we both loved. Michael came home carrying takeout bags, and behind him Catherine with her ever-present tote bag. She smiled brightly, not noticing my disappointment, and set out her food on our dining table. Michael hugged his mother and thanked her for saving dinner. I quietly packed away the meal I'd spent hours making, feeling invisible in my own kitchen. These moments began to stack up one atop another until my sense of belonging crumbled. I started pulling away not just from Catherine, but from Michael too. Our conversations became shorter, punctuated by awkward silences and unspoken hurts. He'd spend his evenings at his mother's, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. When he was home, he was distracted, his thoughts somewhere else. I began to wonder if I was asking for too much, or if the problem was me. Maybe I just wasn't as easy to love as Catherine made herself out to be. I reached out to my mom, desperate for advice, but not wanting to seem ungrateful or dramatic. She listened quietly, then asked a simple question. "Honey, do you feel loved at home?" The question stunned me with its clarity. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped feeling like I mattered. I'd stopped believing my needs were worth voicing. The hurt wasn't just about Catherine's presence, it was about the growing distance between Michael and me, a distance filled with everything we left unsaid. It's a common story I've since learned. So many couples in America struggle with family dynamics, especially when parents have trouble letting go. There's even a term for it, emotional enmeshment, when boundaries blur, and everyone's feelings get tangled up in a knot that's hard to undo. I read articles, talk to friends, even joined an online forum for newlyweds navigating tricky in-law relationships. Their stories echoed my own well-meaning parents, who became gatekeepers to happiness, partners caught in the crossfire, and women like me wondering when their homes had stopped feeling like sanctuaries. The lesson I wish I'd known then is this: love should feel like a safe harbor, not a test you have to keep passing. A healthy marriage isn't about pleasing everyone at your own expense. It's about standing together even when it means disappointing others. If your partner isn't willing to protect your shared space, it's not a failure to want more. It's a sign that something needs to change. I learned painfully that asking for respect isn't selfish. It's the cornerstone of every lasting relationship. Still, I kept hoping for a breakthrough. I suggested therapy, even offered to have a calm conversation with Catherine together. Michael always promised he'd talk to her, but nothing ever changed. The silences grew longer. I spent more and more time alone at the park, at the library, wandering the aisles of grocery stores just to avoid the tension at home. I watched other couples holding hands, laughing in coffee shops, and wondered how something so simple had become so impossible in my own life. As winter approached, the air in Portland grew crisp, and the rain settled in for its long stay. The holidays loomed, bringing with them new opportunities for old wounds to ache. Catherine began making plans for Thanksgiving, assigning dishes and inviting friends without asking if it was what we wanted. I tried once more to speak up. Michael, could we maybe do Thanksgiving just the two of us this year? I just need some time with you. He shook his head, already exasperated, before I'd finished. She'd be heartbroken, Evelyn. Why can't you just go along for once? His words settled over me like a heavy blanket. In that moment, I saw clearly that my marriage wasn't the partnership I'd hoped for. I'd spent so long trying to keep the peace that I'd lost sight of what I needed to feel safe and loved. The cracks were no longer silent. They were gaping loud and impossible to ignore. I wish I could say things changed for the better overnight. But as with most things worth fighting for, the road ahead was filled with hard choices, painful conversations, and moments where I had to decide who I was willing to disappoint, myself or everyone else. I realized that sometimes healing doesn't begin until you admit what's broken, and that's where my story would truly begin again. As I stood by the window that night, watching the rain slip down the glass, I felt a quiet resolve blooming in my chest. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It was time to listen to the quiet voice inside me, the one that said I deserved more than just a place in someone else's story. And as I would soon learn, real change often starts with a single honest conversation, one that can shift the course of everything that comes after. They say that a new life has a way of changing everything, and I felt that truth settle in my bones the morning I discovered I was pregnant. I remember staring at the little pink lines, my heart fluttering between hope and disbelief. I sat in the bathroom for a long time, hands pressed over my belly, wondering what this would mean for Michael and me. For a moment, all the tension and loneliness faded, replaced by something fierce and bright. Maybe this was the new beginning I'd been hoping for. Maybe with a baby, we could build the family I'd always dreamed of. Telling Michael was one of those rare, perfect moments I wish I could bottle and keep forever. He scooped me into his arms and spun me around our tiny living room, laughing and crying at the same time. For days afterward, it was as if a gentle light had settled over us. Michael brought home flowers, made me breakfast in bed, and talked excitedly about baby names. Even Catherine, when she found out, seemed genuinely happy. She insisted on bringing over homemade chicken soup, pressed her hands to my stomach, and called the baby her little blessing. For a while, I let myself believe the worst was behind us. But pregnancy has a way of making every emotion sharper, both the good and the bad. As my belly grew, so did Catherine's presence in our lives. She arrived with books about motherhood, armfuls of hand-me-down baby clothes, and long lists of advice. Don't eat too much sugar. Evelyn, it's bad for the baby's brain. You have to listen to classical music. Harper will be smarter. Sometimes she spoke as if I wasn't even in the room, talking to Michael about what was best for the baby, as if my opinions were secondary. I tried to smile to take her advice in stride, but it was exhausting, especially on days when my back ached and the world felt heavy. I remember one afternoon when Catherine came over with a folder full of birth plan printouts. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, reading each detail aloud. Natural birth, no epidural, only organic cotton for the baby's blankets. I listened politely at first, but as she continued, I felt a wave of frustration I couldn't swallow down. Catherine, I appreciate your help, I said softly, but I'd like to make these decisions with Michael. She pursed her lips, set the papers aside, and said, Of course, dear, but trust me, I know best. I wanted to believe she meant well, but I felt smaller with every word she spoke. The tension grew with each doctor's visit, each milestone in my pregnancy. Catherine wanted to be included in everything she asked, to come to ultrasounds, volunteered to decorate the nursery, and insisted that the baby should have her maiden name as a middle name. When I tried to set gentle limits, Michael seemed caught in the middle, torn between wanting to keep the peace and supporting me. She's just excited, he'd say. She loves you, Ev. She just wants to help." But it didn't feel like help. It felt like control. And as the months passed, my anxiety grew alongside my anticipation. There's a kind of loneliness in pregnancy that's hard to explain even when you're surrounded by people. I found myself craving time alone, walking for hours along the river, hoping the movement would soothe both my aching back and my restless mind. I would watch mothers in the park with their toddlers laughing and chasing bubbles and wonder what kind of mother I would be. Would I have the strength to stand up for my child, to create the home I wanted, even if it meant disappointing others? The question lingered in my thoughts, especially on nights when Harper kicked softly beneath my ribs, as if reminding me she was already here, already watching how I navigated the world. One evening, Catherine hosted a family dinner and announced without asking that she'd chosen a name for the baby Grace after her own mother. She beamed at Michael, expecting his approval. I looked at him, hoping he would speak up for us, but he just shrugged, smiling apologetically. "We'll talk about it," he said. I excused myself to the bathroom, hot tears stinging my eyes. It was a small moment, but it made me realize how easy it is to lose your voice when you're afraid of conflict. I promised myself then that I would not let Harper grow up learning to shrink herself just to make others comfortable. Pregnancy isn't just a physical journey, it's an emotional rite of passage. Every day, I learned a little more about what it means to be resilient, to listen to my own instincts. I started journaling, writing letters to my unborn daughter, telling her all the things I wished someone had told me. You are enough. Your voice matters. It's okay to draw a line, even with people you love. I learned, too, that setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about protecting what matters most. As my due date approached, I made a quiet decision to give birth at a birthing center with just Michael and a trusted nurse by my side. Catherine protested, insisting on being there for her grandchild's first breath. I stood my ground gently but firmly. "This is something I need to do my way," I told her. It was the first time I saw her truly angry, and the guilt washed over me in waves. But as I placed my hand over my belly and felt Harper move, I knew I was doing the right thing, not just for me but for my daughter. Looking back, I realized that becoming a mother started long before Harper was born. It began the moment I chose to trust myself to listen to that quiet voice inside that said, "You know what's best." The lesson was clear. Loving your child sometimes means disappointing others, even those who mean well. It's not easy, and it's not always pretty, but it's what motherhood is all about. As the final weeks of pregnancy slipped by, anticipation and worry mingled together. I could feel a change on the horizon, something bigger than anything I'd faced before. I didn't know it then, but the real test of boundaries and love was yet to come. That test would arrive with Harper's birth, ushering in both unexpected joy and unimaginable challenge. And as I braced myself for what lay ahead, I promised my daughter and myself this time I would not stay silent. There's a sweetness to the first days of motherhood, a quiet awe that fills every corner of your world. Harper's arrival was nothing short of miraculous. The moment I first held her so tiny and warm against my chest, I knew everything had changed. The world seemed to shrink down to the size of her little hands curling around my finger, her sleepy sighs, the rise and fall of her breath on my shoulder. Even Michael, who had lately felt distant, softened in those first nights rocking Harper to sleep with a look of wonder in his eyes. But as the novelty faded, the challenges of new parenthood set in. Sleep was a distant memory, and each day blurred into the next. What surprised me most was not the exhaustion, but how quickly my efforts to build a gentle routine for Harper were swept away by Catherine's determination to be at the center of it all. She arrived early every morning, sometimes before sunrise, her arms full of supplies, and her voice already bustling with plans for the day. At first I told myself that this was a blessing. Not everyone has a mother-in-law willing to help, friends would say. Catherine fed Harper, bathed her, and insisted on holding her during nap time. She took charge of feeding schedules, decided which diapers to buy, and rearranged the nursery to make it more efficient. If Harper cried, Catherine would quickly take her from my arms, whispering, "You just need a little grandma magic." I felt myself shrinking day by day, as if I were only a guest in my daughter's life. I tried to voice my concerns, but each attempt seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. "Evelyn, you're so lucky to have help. Michael reminded me she knows what she's doing. She's raised 2 kids." But what no one saw was how her help left me feeling more isolated than ever. There were days when I wondered if Harper would even recognize me as her mother. So often was she nestled in Catherine's embrace. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult night, I found Catherine sitting in the rocker, humming softly while Harper slept in her arms. She looked up, smiled, and said, "Babies need to feel loved, not fussed over with routines." My throat tightened, but I managed a small, tired nod. Looking back, I realized there's a fine line between support and control. Catherine's involvement had started as kindness, but now felt like an occupation. She questioned every choice I made, from breastfeeding to bath temperature. "You're being too strict," she'd chide. "Babies need freedom, not schedules." When I tried to establish a gentle bedtime routine, Catherine dismissed it as modern nonsense. She was quick to remind me of her own experience, as if my instincts couldn't possibly measure up. The loss of control wasn't just about Harper's care, it seeped into every aspect of my home life. Catherine would rearrange our cupboards, upgrade our linens, and take over my kitchen without asking. She dismissed my requests for space with a gentle pat on the hand and a promise that someday you'll appreciate this. I tried talking to Michael, but his patience was wearing thin. "She's just excited to be a grandmother," he'd say. "Try to let her in, Ev." I wondered how much more of myself I could give away before there was nothing left. One morning stands out like a warning bell I nearly ignored. I was rocking Harper, softly singing, when Catherine swept in and took her mid-song without so much as a word. "She's fussy, dear. Let me handle it." That moment, more than any other, made me realize I was losing my place in my own family. I retreated to the bathroom and cried quietly, trying not to let Harper hear. Afterward, I looked at my reflection and promised myself that my daughter would grow up knowing she was safe, and so would I. So many new mothers face this silent struggle. Our culture values independence, but it's not always easy to set boundaries, especially with family. There's an unspoken pressure to be grateful for help, even when it comes at the cost of your own confidence. I started reading stories on parenting forums, finding comfort in the voices of other women who had fought for their right to parent in their own way. Their advice was clear: don't wait until resentment becomes anger. Set boundaries early and stand by them even when it's uncomfortable. My first step was small, but it felt monumental. One afternoon, I asked Catherine to call before coming over. She bristled, surprised by my request. "But I only want what's best for Harper," she said. I nodded, meeting her gaze. "So do I, Catherine. That's why I need space to learn and grow as her mother." There was a long, heavy pause. It didn't solve everything, but it marked the beginning of a shift. The lesson I took from those days is this: accepting help doesn't mean surrendering your instincts. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your child and for yourself is to draw a line and say, "I am enough." Boundaries are not walls. They are invitations to healthier relationships. The people who truly love you will learn to honor them. But the greatest test of boundaries and love was just around the corner. I sensed it in Catherine's eyes, in Michael's growing distance, and in the uneasy quiet that sometimes settled over our home. It would arrive suddenly in a moment that changed everything, demanding more strength than I thought I possessed. Even now, when I look back, I realize that nothing could have truly prepared me for what came next. But in my heart, I knew I would fight for Harper no matter the cost. Some turning points arrive without warning, forever splitting your story into a before and an after. For me, that night came in the quiet darkness long after the world had gone to sleep. Harper was 3 months old, her cheeks round and pink, her cries soft but insistent when the world overwhelmed her. That evening, exhaustion pressed on me like a weight, but as I finally lay down, I found no rest, just a mother's worry humming in my chest. Michael was out late for work, and Catherine had insisted on staying to help with Harper's fussy bedtime. At first, I was grateful for the company. I took a long shower, letting the steam ease the ache in my shoulders. When I stepped out, the house was silent, too silent. I tiptoed toward the nursery, half expecting to find Catherine singing a lullaby, but instead, I saw her standing by Harper's crib, frustration etched deep on her face. Harper was wailing, her tiny fists curled tight. "Enough, Harper." Catherine snapped, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard. In a blur, she scooped Harper up a little too roughly, bouncing her harder than necessary. My heart seized as Harper's cries turned shrill and then suddenly stopped altogether. Time seemed to freeze. I rushed forward, my hands shaking, snatching Harper from Catherine's arms. For one agonizing moment, Harper lay limp, her face pale, her breath barely a whisper. Panic roared in my ears. "What happened?" I cried, but Catherine looked away, her eyes cold and unyielding. Instinct overrode everything. I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I described the emergency. "My baby isn't breathing right. Please hurry." Minutes later, the paramedics burst through our door, their calm urgency both terrifying and oddly comforting. Harper's small body was quickly cradled in professional hands, oxygen mask fitted gently over her nose. I stood back, my legs weak, watching strangers work to save my daughter. Catherine hovered nearby, her face a careful mask of concern. When the paramedics asked what happened, she spoke first, saying Harper had slipped from her grasp while being rocked. It was an accident, she insisted. I could barely find my voice, but when I did, it came out raw. She was too rough. She got angry. At the hospital, the sterile lights made everything feel more real, and yet somehow less so. Doctors examined Harper, their language clipped and clinical. Mild shaken baby syndrome, one nurse explained, likely from forceful movement, not a simple fall. The words chilled me to the bone. They asked me what happened, and I told them the truth, tears streaming down my face as I relived those awful moments. Catherine stuck to her story, casting doubt and confusion wherever she could. Michael arrived frantic and wide-eyed, his gaze flicking between his mother and me. In situations like these, the system in America moves swiftly. Social workers and police arrived gently but firmly, asking questions, piecing together the timeline. I was grateful for their professionalism, but also frightened, afraid that somehow I would be blamed, that Harper might be taken from me, that the truth would slip away in the tangle of conflicting stories. Catherine's words had weight, and for a moment even Michael seemed unsure whom to believe. That night, sitting alone in a hospital chair, watching Harper's chest rise and fall, I realized just how quickly help can turn into harm. I thought about all the signs I'd missed, moments when Catherine's frustration simmered just below the surface, times when she'd brushed aside my requests or handled Harper too roughly in her impatience. I wished I'd listened more closely to my instincts, wished I'd trusted my own voice sooner. There's a terrible loneliness that comes with crisis, a silence that rings louder than any scream. But I also found a fierce clarity that night. The line between support and danger was no longer blurred. It was clear, bold, and absolute. I made a silent vow to protect Harper no matter the cost, and to never again let fear or politeness keep me from doing what I knew was right. In the days that followed, everything changed. Catherine was questioned by police. Michael was called in for interviews. Friends and neighbors offered sympathy, but also whispers. Rumors spread quickly, and I heard fragments of judgment. She must have pushed her too hard, or maybe Evelyn isn't cut out for motherhood. It hurt, but not as much as the possibility of losing Harper. My focus narrowed to the essentials, my daughter's recovery, and the path toward healing. Through it all, the hospital staff became my allies. They taught me what to watch for, how to advocate for my child, and most importantly, how to trust myself again. I learned that in America, shaken baby syndrome is sadly common, most often the result of frustration in exhausted caregivers. It's never an accident, and never excusable. I joined an online support group for mothers in crisis, their stories both heartbreaking and empowering. One woman wrote, "You can't always prevent harm, but you can choose what happens next." The lesson from that night is seared into my heart. Never ignore the quiet voice that warns you something isn't right. No amount of tradition, family pressure, or fear of conflict is worth your child's safety. You are your child's first and fiercest protector, even if it means standing alone. As Harper slowly healed, so did I. The path forward would be messy, filled with legal battles, hard conversations, and the slow work of rebuilding trust. But for the first time in a long while, I felt sure of one thing: I would not let the past dictate our future. No matter what came next, I was determined to fight for the life and the love Harper deserved. And as the seasons shifted in Portland, bringing fresh rain and the first hint of spring, I sensed a different kind of renewal beginning. The hardest storms, after all, sometimes clear the way for new growth. But the true test, standing up for justice, setting boundaries that held firm and redefining our family on my own terms, was only just beginning. If I could describe the days after that terrible night in just one word, it would be relentless. Every hour felt like a new wave crashing over me. I remember the constant hum of voices, nurses asking gentle questions, social workers reviewing reports, police officers speaking in calm but firm tones. My world shrank to the bright clinical corners of Harper's hospital room, the beeping of machines and the ache in my chest as I watched my daughter heal minute by minute. Catherine, meanwhile, seemed to retreat into a role she'd perfected: the concerned grandmother. She gave measured statements to the police, never wavering from her story. It was an accident, she insisted, her eyes wide with practiced worry. She told friends and family the same thing: how she'd only wanted to help, how quickly things can happen when caring for a baby. Michael was torn, hovering at the edge of the truth, uncertain which way to lean. At times I could see the old warmth in his eyes, at others a coldness I barely recognized. The investigation moved faster than I'd imagined, but it still felt like an eternity. I gave my statement describing everything: my fears, my suspicions, the moment Harper fell silent. I answered questions about our home life, about my own mental health, about how often Catherine visited. Every answer felt like a risk. Would they believe me? Or would the long shadow of family loyalty tip the scales in her favor? This is the silent fear many mothers carry, that when something goes wrong, they'll be the first blamed, the last believed. I saw it in the way friends hesitated to ask about Harper, in the way some neighbors looked away when I passed by. I read articles at night, learning about how courts handle child welfare cases, how quickly the narrative can twist against a mother if she's perceived as unstable or emotional. My only anchor was the truth, and my love for Harper, which felt sharper and fiercer than ever. We hired a lawyer, someone recommended by a nurse who'd seen too many families destroyed by silence. She listened to my story with empathy, but also realism. "These cases are tough," she said. "But your hospital records, the medical findings, they matter. Don't give up." She helped me gather evidence texts I'd sent to Michael about Catherine's rough handling photos of rearranged furniture, even diary entries where I'd written about feeling uneasy. It felt like assembling a puzzle where the stakes were everything. Michael's role in all of this was its own heartbreak. He wanted so badly for everyone to be innocent, for this to be a misunderstanding that could simply be erased. But reality has a way of demanding clarity. One afternoon in the lawyer's office, she turned to him and asked Michael, "Do you believe your wife?" The silence was long and painful. Finally, he nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I do," he whispered. "I just wish it wasn't true." That moment broke something in me, but it also set me free. Sometimes the people you hope will fight for you simply can't, and you have to fight for yourself and your child instead. The court process was grueling, a marathon of hearings, interviews, and testimonies. Catherine hired her own lawyer and brought character witnesses to speak of her devotion as a mother and grandmother. I watched as the system unfolded, sometimes fair, sometimes painfully slow. There were moments I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all: the early morning court dates, the harsh questions, the way strangers now held the power to decide my family's fate. Still, I found unexpected strength from others who'd walked this path before me. I joined a local support group for mothers navigating the family court system. We met in a church basement, sharing stories over coffee and paper cups of tea. One mother, Carla, had fought for 2 years to regain custody after a similar incident with her own mother-in-law. "You have to trust the process, but also trust yourself," she told me. Don't be afraid to speak your truth, no matter how many times you have to say it. Their encouragement became my lifeline. As the case moved forward, the medical evidence proved decisive. Doctors testified that Harper's injuries were consistent with forceful handling, not a simple fall. The court ordered a psychological evaluation for Catherine, which revealed underlying anger issues and a tendency to minimize her own responsibility. Finally, after what felt like endless waiting, the judge made her ruling. Catherine would have no further contact with Harper. I was awarded full custody and the right to make all decisions for my daughter. The relief was overwhelming, but it was laced with grief. Michael and I, already distant, found ourselves unable to bridge the chasm Catherine had helped to create. He moved out quietly, leaving a note of apology and a promise to support us in whatever way he could. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but in my heart, I knew that healing for Harper and me would only begin once our home was truly our own. The lesson I carry from those long months in court is that justice is rarely neat or easy. It demands patience, faith, and a willingness to be misunderstood. But when it comes, it can be a salve, a reminder that your voice, no matter how shaky, deserves to be heard. The price was high, the loss of a marriage, the unraveling of extended family, and the scars that lingered. But as I watched Harper play in the soft morning light, her laughter free and bright, I knew I'd made the right choice. What comes after a storm like that? For me, it was the slow, steady work of healing, learning to trust myself again, to build new routines, and to find beauty in the ordinary moments I'd once taken for granted. The legal battles were over, but the journey to wholeness had just begun. I promised myself that whatever came next, I would greet it with the same courage that had carried me through the darkest nights. And so as one chapter closed in the quiet halls of the courthouse, another began in the gentle sunlit rooms of our new life, a life I would now shape day by day for Harper and for me. The day the court order became final, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me. After so many months spent bracing for the next battle, the next question, the next day in court, there was a sudden quiet in my life that felt almost unfamiliar. It was as if the world paused, offering a space where I could finally breathe. But in that silence, old aches began to surface. I found myself staring out the window while Harper napped, wondering what came next now, that our lives belonged only to us. Healing, I quickly learned, is not a single moment of triumph. It's the slow work of tending to invisible wounds, the kind that only time and care can truly mend. Harper, resilient as ever, bounced back in ways that humbled me. She gurgled, giggled, and reached for me with chubby arms, reminding me every day that love is stronger than fear. But I knew we both carried scars, hers on the inside, mine, threaded through my heart. I was determined that our story wouldn't end with survival alone. We deserved joy. We deserved to thrive. That's when I turned to therapy, not just for Harper, but for myself. I found a gentle patient therapist who specialized in trauma for mothers and young children. Our first sessions were full of gentle silences and the slow unpacking of grief. I spoke about the guilt I carried, the moments I wondered if I could have protected Harper sooner, the anger at Michael and at myself for letting things go so far. My therapist listened without judgment. She told me, "You did what you could with the knowledge and strength you had. Now you're choosing a different path. That's what matters." For Harper, therapy was more playful floor time with toys and soft music, gentle encouragement to express her feelings, even at such a young age. I learned how to spot signs of stress in her, how to soothe her when nightmares left her restless at night. It was a daily lesson in patience and tenderness, not just for Harper, but for myself. I began to realize that healing didn't mean forgetting the pain. It meant carrying it with compassion, using it to build something better. We moved apartments, trading the memories of old rooms for new light and fresh paint. I chose a little place in the Alberta Arts District, where every corner seemed alive with hope. Local murals bright with color flower boxes and windows, neighbors who smiled and waved. I painted Harper's room, a soft blue, let her help hang little cloud-shaped mobiles above her crib. Each small decision became a way to reclaim my voice, to create a home that felt safe and ours alone. Building a new life was not always easy. There were days when loneliness crept in, when the weight of single motherhood, the balancing act of work and home and self-care, felt almost too much. My freelance accounting work allowed me to stay close to Harper, but it was sometimes isolating the glow of my laptop, a poor substitute for real connection. On those days, I reminded myself that progress wasn't measured by perfection, but by presence reading stories to Harper before bed, baking simple cookies on Sunday afternoons, laughing together at bubbles and sidewalk chalk and silly songs. One of the best choices I made was joining a local moms group. We met at a park or a coffee shop, trading advice and encouragement between sips of tea and the watchful eyes of our toddlers. There, I found other women who'd weathered storms, divorce loss, heartbreak, and who knew that healing happens in community as much as in solitude. I heard stories of mothers starting over, building businesses, finding love again, or simply finding themselves. We celebrated every small victory, from first steps to first words, knowing that behind every milestone was a mountain of effort. A small but profound lesson emerged. There is no shame in needing help nor in seeking joy, even after hardship. One afternoon, a friend from the group, Leah, said something that stuck with me. You can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself too. So I carved out pockets of time just for me, morning walks before Harper woke, a quiet hour with a favorite book evening spent journaling or painting my nails. Little rituals, but they added up, reminding me that my identity was not lost, only transformed. Slowly, trust began to return, not just in others, but in myself. I started believing that I was a good mother, not just a survivor. Harper's laughter was the greatest evidence. I watched her blossom fearless at the playground, gentle with pets, curious about every puddle and dandelion. Our home, once defined by fear and intrusion, was now a sanctuary of warmth and new beginnings. There were still hard moments. Sometimes Harper would wake from a nap, crying for no reason, and the memories would surge. On some nights when the wind rattled the windows, just so I'd find my own heart racing. But we learned to move through those shadows together. When Harper was scared, I'd hold her close and whisper, "You're safe, sweetheart. I'm here." In those words, I was soothing both of us. If I could offer a lesson from this chapter of our lives, it's that healing is a process, not a destination. It's the choice every day to meet your pain with patience, to let kindness in, and to believe, despite everything, that new joy is possible. It's in the small daily acts of self-compassion, the willingness to accept support, and the courage to try again. And so, as Harper and I settled into our new rhythms, planting a little garden, baking muffins, meeting friends at the Saturday market, I felt the first real sense of hope in a long time. Our story wasn't just about what we'd lost. It was about what we were building: trust, safety, love, and the foundation for a life that was finally beautifully our own. Yet as the sun set on those quiet evenings, I knew our journey was not yet complete. There was more growing to do, more joy to find, and a future waiting to be shaped by the lessons we'd learned. Because healing is never just about leaving the past behind. It's about creating something new with every sunrise, and that I was ready to embrace. Healing laid the foundation, but thriving was something I had to learn slowly, brick by brick. At first, it was the simplest victories that lifted my spirit. A quiet morning, when Harper awoke, smiling, a dinner we cooked together without any tears, a moment of laughter so pure, it seemed to echo through our new apartment like sunlight. These small pockets of happiness became my milestones, proof that we were moving from mere survival to truly living. One of the most powerful changes came when I reimagined my work. Instead of just freelancing to pay the bills, I started my own small accounting practice from home. It was a leap of faith, daunting, exciting, and at times overwhelming. But the flexibility allowed me to be present for Harper, to walk her to daycare, to chaperone field trips, to be the face she saw at the end of every school day. Building something of my own was not only about financial independence. It was about reclaiming my sense of purpose, showing Harper that new dreams can grow even in the most unlikely soil. Our life in the Alberta Arts District flourished with new traditions. Every Saturday, Harper and I would visit the farmer's market hand in hand, collecting flowers for our windowsill and tasting fresh strawberries. On warm afternoons, we'd paint on the porch, our fingers stained with color, and our laughter drifting down the street. In the evenings, we'd read stories under a blanket, Fort Harper's head resting against my heart, both of us safe in a world of our own making. These rituals, though simple, were sacred, a daily reminder of how far we'd come. There were still echoes of the past. Sometimes when Harper got sick or had a nightmare, I'd feel old fears stir inside me. Was I doing enough? Was I still somehow failing her? But then I'd remember what we'd survived. I'd see Harper's resilience, her kindness to friends, her courage on the playground, her curiosity and boldness. She taught me again and again that children are far stronger and more forgiving than we realize. If she could let love back into her heart, then surely I could too. Community became our anchor. The moms group that had started as a lifeline became a circle of friends. We celebrated birthdays together, supported each other through setbacks, and shared the kinds of stories that only mothers can truly understand. It was in their company that I found space to laugh at my own mistakes and to give advice to newer moms walking their own rocky roads. I realized that every woman in the group, no matter her journey, was writing her own comeback story, and that inspired me to keep writing mine. A pivotal moment came the first time I allowed myself to dream beyond motherhood. Harper had started preschool and was thriving, making friends and delighting in every new experience. With more time for myself, I took up running again, a hobby I'd abandoned in the chaos of crisis. The rhythm of my feet on Portland's quiet, tree-lined streets became its own kind of therapy. I set small goals, finish a local 5K, read more books, plan a weekend getaway with Harper to the coast. Each time I reached a milestone, no matter how tiny, I celebrated, letting gratitude and pride wash over me. The biggest lesson of this season was learning to embrace imperfection. There were days when dishes piled up, deadlines loomed, or Harper's tantrums tested my patience. Sometimes I yelled, sometimes I cried, and sometimes I felt lonely. But instead of seeing these moments as failures, I learned to accept them as part of real, messy life. A dear friend once said, "Thriving doesn't mean everything is perfect. It means you find beauty even in the mess." That wisdom became a guiding star. Harper thrived too. She danced in the living room, painted pictures of rainbows and families, and asked the kinds of questions that made me marvel at her growing mind. Watching her confidence bloom was the ultimate reward. At a school play, she marched onto the stage with a handmade crown and declared, "I'm not scared, Mommy. You taught me how to be brave." Tears welled in my eyes, pride mingling with relief. This was the joy I'd fought for, not just peace, but possibility. As the seasons turned, I noticed my own heart softening to the world again. I joined a local volunteer group helping women rebuild their lives after family trauma. Sharing my experience, hearing theirs, and witnessing the ripple effect of compassion reminded me that our pain, when faced with honesty and hope, can become a bridge for others. My own scars no longer felt like marks of shame. They were symbols of resilience and empathy. If there's one message I'd share from this chapter, it's that thriving is not a destination, it's a practice. It's the choice to keep showing up, to keep seeking joy, to keep believing that you are worthy of good things. It's about giving yourself grace on the hard days and celebrating the victories, no matter how small, on the good ones. Now, when Harper and I sit together beneath the window, our arms wrapped around each other, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Our story is no longer just about what we endured. It's about how we rebuilt together, how love, patience, and a willingness to hope again can turn even the darkest seasons into the start of something beautiful. And as I look toward the future, the final chapter in this journey, I know that our story has only just begun. There are more lessons to share, more hearts to reach, and more joy waiting on the horizon. That's the promise I carry for Harper, for myself, and for anyone listening who still believes in the power of starting over. When I look back on this journey, I see not just the shadows, but the light that managed to break through day by day. Our story began with hope, two people dreaming of a life together, then learning, sometimes painfully, that love is not always enough without boundaries, honesty, and courage. From those first uneasy moments with Catherine to the slow erosion of peace in our home, the cracks in my marriage and the bittersweet arrival of Harper, every chapter taught me something I wish I'd known sooner. I learned that family can be both a comfort and a challenge, that sometimes the greatest tests come not from strangers, but from those who mean the most. I discovered the difference between help and control, between loving support and the kind of presence that stifles rather than lifts. When crisis came, a night I will never forget, I faced the deepest fear of any mother that I might lose my child, that my voice might not be heard, that the truth would be swept away by silence or shame. Yet it was in that storm that I found a kind of strength I didn't know I possessed. The legal battles were exhausting, often lonely, but they brought clarity and a new sense of purpose. I learned to trust myself to speak for Harper and to insist on what was right, even when it meant letting go of people and dreams I once held dear. Healing was slow, made up of therapy sessions, fresh routines, and the building of a home that was finally truly ours. Community, small moments of joy, and the steady resilience of a little girl's laughter became my compass as I built a life defined by love, not fear. We moved beyond survival into a life that was colorful and real. We painted together, grew friendships, created new traditions, and let go of the past without forgetting the lessons it taught us. Harper's bravery inspired me every day, her trust, her laughter, her curiosity. Watching her become herself was a daily reminder that hope can take root anywhere, even in places where we once thought nothing good could grow. If you take anything from our story, let it be this: you are stronger than you think. And it's never too late to choose yourself and your child, to set boundaries, to rebuild, and to reach for joy. Family is not just who you're born to, but who you choose, who you let in, and who stands beside you when things get hard. Healing is not a straight line, but a series of steps, sometimes faltering, sometimes bold, toward the life you truly deserve. Thank you for walking this path with me. If our story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in any piece of it, or if you simply want to support more stories of courage and renewal, I invite you to join our community. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story matters. Your voice can help someone else take their first step toward healing. Let's keep this conversation going, because together we can create a space where hope is stronger than fear, where love is louder than shame, and where every new beginning is celebrated. Here's to starting over, to growing stronger, and to believing always that the best is still ahead. Thank you for being here. We can't wait to share more with you.